So it's a honor and a great pleasure to be invited today to celebrate Pat and the success of the McGovern Institute. I was looking through my slides and I didn't have a picture of Pat that reflected how I knew him, and that is as an extraordinarily happy, engaged leader. Somebody who was, as Lori has just said, optimistic, action-oriented, and a visionary in terms of the future of neuroscience. So I found this slide. Just to give you some indication how early Pat had these traits. Pat graduated from MIT in 1959. He was a double major between biology and computer science. And he came to MIT because he wanted to be able to design computers that could think and learn like the human. And he thought he needed to learn some neuroscience. So he came to MIT and graduated in biology, did research here in neuroscience, and Pat made the decision, visionaries have to be able to make these decisions, that he was ahead of his time. The field and the science was not ready in '59 to integrate how we learn with computers. Computers had not caught up. He graduated from MIT, started as a writer for computer and automation, one of the first publications in the field of computer science. 5 years later, he started IDC actually, and issued the first publication in the computer world. And then 3 years later, at 27, he established his first company. And at 30, he launched Computer World. And as they say, the rest is history. He, at IDG, as it was a mature company, had 280 independent publications in 80 different countries. So he was an extraordinary visionary. He was an extraordinary business person. And today in the Boston Globe on the editorial page, there is a article by Glenn Rifkin on his new book about Pat McGovern as a leader in business. Now, Pat had all this success, but throughout his life, and when I met him in 1998, he retained this fascination with the human brain and neuroscience. And he was very excited about returning to that subject and being involved in neuroscience here at MIT. So I first met Pat and Lori in 1998. At that time, I was chair of the Department of Biology. I had been chair for about 7 years. And as anyone knows, leading an organization, by the time you're 7 years into an organization, you're covering up your previous mistakes by making new mistakes. And it was time to find another job. But the real motivation that got me interested in being involved with the McGovern Institute was that when I took the chairmanship of biology, I wanted to expand neuroscience. MIT, I was confident, was underinvested in neuroscience. It was a science that was going to transform our future. It was going to transform how we understood the human as a biological organism and mankind as people that interacted. If you think about it, it's pretty obvious that our most unique attribute is our brain, is our ability to think, our ability to learn, our ability to act. And understanding the biological basis of that process and how it evolved and how we can use it better will be an enormous transformation in society. It'll help us learn more efficiently, communicate more efficiently. It'll be the basis of economic development as it is now apparent. It'll be the basis of being able to solve some of the most difficult medical and mental problems of society. It's transformational. And when Pat was introduced to me by Chuck Vest and Lori, I was very excited about the fact that MIT might be able to expand neuroscience with their excitement and their resources. The other reason it was the time is that computational power had become sufficiently powerful that one could think of the integration of that technology with molecular and genetic technology transforming the rate at which progress was going to be made in neuroscience. So I was invited down to the IDG headquarters where I met Lori and Pat on Beacon Street, and it was an exciting moment for me, and I think it was a very exciting moment for them. Now, the McGovern Institute was building on a strong platform at MIT. It was too small, but it was strong. It was a program in brain and cognitive science that Hans Tuber launched in 1964. And then in 1993, the Department of Brain and Cognitive Science was established here at MIT with Emilio Bizzi as its leader. And the Center for Learning and Memory had been established under the leadership of Susumu Tamagawa. So we had this movement of MIT in establishing neuroscience here and expanding neuroscience in the late 90s, mid 90s. But with Pat and Lori's commitment of $350 million for over 20 years to establish the McGovern Institute, it became very clear that there was a new opportunity at MIT to change neuroscience at this institution. So this is a few slides from 2002, which was our first board meeting. And I found these as I was thinking about this lecture. And this is my first statement about the McGovern Institute. The purpose of the McGovern Institute is to investigate and ultimately understand the biological basis of higher functions of the human brain. Now, I know this statement was crafted as a molecular and cell biologist, which is what I am. And I made it clear to the community that I was excited about leading this, but I was not going to become a neuroscientist because I didn't think I could do it in the time that was necessary to actually be a neuroscientist and make a difference in that field. But I still think that this is a very powerful objective, biological basis and function of the human brain, but it also is one in which many other attributes play a role in leading us to understand in time with these objectives how the brain works. The excitement of that meeting was the statement about the launch of the Institute. One of the important decisions that we made at the beginning, working with Pat and Lori, who had previously had experience with the Whitehead Institute, is that this institute would be modeled on the shape and size of the Whitehead Institute. And that was very important, not only because there's real momentum when you have 16 or so investigators committed to a common cause, but in a more practical sense, it meant there had to be 85,000 square foot of space built somewhere to house this building. And 85,000 square foot of space was more than MIT could stick in a corner somewhere. So that led us to the idea of moving to this corner of Main Street in Albany and establishing a whole new building of 3 institutes, the Brain and Cognitive Department, the McGovern, and the PICAR, ultimately the PICAR, here on the corner of Main Street in Albany. And that transformed MIT in neuroscience forever. And it has led to leadership in this community by this institution. Now, Charles Correa was selected as the architect of the Institute, a very distinguished and internationally known architect. And he soon, and Goody and Clancy was retained to design the interior structure of the building because they had built many labs around MIT. And therefore, the magnificent building that you're sitting in today came into fruition. And this is a picture of a schematic that was, or I don't know, graphic that was produced, which turned out to be this marvelous building of neuroscience here at MIT. Charles Correa, after he designed the building and after the building was built, kept telling me, remember, this is a ship moving through Cambridge to the east. This building was designed on that basis. So look at that. You see the bow of the ship. You see the smokestacks at the top. And it's plowing to the east with the curved surface. And he was very concerned, so I want to get this in the MIT memory. He was very concerned that over to your left, that the Parsons building not disappear. Because he said this building can't be understood unless the Parsons building is there, because it's plowing through the Parsons building to the east. And he doesn't want it replaced with a park. He wants a building there. So that's the design of the building. But as you know, the building had one other trait, and that is the train tracks. And we had to deal with the train tracks because there was all sorts of concern that the vibrations of the train coming through the building, you're sitting on top of a train track here, coming through the building would disrupt all the very high precision instruments that you have to do recording in the nervous system in preparations. Well, it turned out that the engineers and the physicists and others at MIT could solve that problem. But the problem wasn't the train tracks. The problem was the subway system over there. Because the train only runs 2 times a day. That subway system runs every 5, 10, 20 minutes. And that is lots of magnetic and vibrations, waves that could come into the building. So as you know, this building is set on piers driven down 200 or so feet in bedrock, and it sort of sets and vibrates slowly because of the mass on top of that. And then it became this beautiful atrium, which I think is the most attractive interior space on the MIT campus. It brings us together. It's a beautiful home for a community to really have an enormous impact in advancing neuroscience and making a difference in the world. So we designed the building and it came into fruition. The research vision that really was the basis of the early days of the McGovern Institute is here. Systems and computational neuroscience, imaging and cognitive neuroscience, and genetic and cellular neuroscience. And that was manifest in the faculty who, in 2003, were part of the McGovern. Tommy Poggio was the associate director of the McGovern, and I had the great pleasure of working with Tommy in bringing the McGovern Institute into its existence. Emilio Bizzi and Graybill and Nancy Kanwasher were all part of the original 4 people in neuroscience who actually knew neuroscience as we put it together. We recruited in the first year or so Jim DiCarlo, Chris Moore, and Michael Fee. And as you know, Jim and Michael are central leaders in the McGovern Institute and have made major contributions to science. And then in genetic and cellular neuroscience, Bob Horowitz and Martha Constantine-Patton joined us and led us in molecular and genetic neuroscience. So that was the early days of the establishment of the McGovern Institute. And here's a picture of the breaking ground for the building. And that is the community that watched this building come. You can see Lori and Pat there. Pat is very happy in what is the coming institute at MIT. We watched the building go up. And at the same time, and I want to use this to comment, in 2003, we held a symposium, the first major symposium of the McGovern Institute. And this was 2 years before we occupied the building. And we had a star-studded speaker series for that symposium, some from internal, many from external around the world. And what was really striking from the beginning of the McGovern Institute to when it was established and to current times is just how strong support for the Institute has been by the national and international neuroscience community. It has been lifted by our colleagues who've helped us recruit, communicate the importance of this field, and benefit from the activity in this field. So neuroscience as a field has grown at MIT with a national and international support, and as you know, the McGovern Institute as a family now is clearly an international organization. Now, everything is very successful, and I'll come back to it in a moment, but one thing didn't get built.
They're talking about it now.
They're still talking about it? Oh, okay, they're talking about it now. A elevated passage over Vassar Street, connecting the McGovern and the neuroscience complex to the rest of MIT in a central corridor. And this became a budgetary issue, and we still await being connected to the rest of the Institute. But I look back on this, let's say 20 years or 19 years in specific, from 2002, from the first announcement of the McGovern Institute, to where the McGovern Institute is now and the contributions it's made and where neuroscience is. And it's been an extraordinary journey. And I compliment Bob Desimone and the leadership of the McGovern Institute, its faculty, the supporting community in brain and cognitive science, and in the PIC Hour for making MIT such a special place for neuroscience. You are going to change the world in biological and life science. There is no question about it. MIT is going to be changed by you, and that's terribly exciting. And to have a little part of the beginning of that, just a little part, of being able to say, let's do it, I'll help you, it's been extraordinarily gratifying. The last thing I will say to you is I was saying to Bob this morning that the biomedical side of neuroscience is about to explode. And the reason for that is that I think we're going to have success in changing the course of Alzheimer's. I think we'll have success then in changing the course of many other diseases that are mental. Genetics is advancing rapidly. New therapeutic modalities such as oligonucleotides is advancing rapidly. Imaging is advancing rapidly. So I think there will be an increasing emphasis or activity in that domain. I'm sure this complex McGovern and the brain and cog will be part of that. It'll also be a larger community, but it is something that I feel is really going to change over the next 10 years. So I congratulate you. I thank you, Lori and Pat, for making this happen. It's been extraordinary. Thank you.